I have a question for all those executives in Hollywood. Whatever happened to movies with people in them?
Now available in paperback and e-readers, Spellbound, A Darker Shade of Black. Get your copy today at your favorite online bookseller.
I have a question to ask all of those executives and producers in Hollywood. Whatever happened to movies with people in them? Movies like Sunset Boulevard, movies like Marty, movies like The Maltese Falcon, movies like The Godfather, movies like Kramer versus Kramer, movies like The Last American Virgin, movies like American Ninja, movies like Pretty Woman, movies like Ghost, movies like Clueless, and even movies like Bad Teacher. Whatever happened to movies about people in genres like drama, comedy, romantic comedies, teen movies, and even horror movies? Whatever happened to movies about the human condition, and whatever happened to movies that told us stories about people? I'm wondering what happened to those kinds of movies, because we no longer see those kinds of movies being produced anymore by Hollywood. Now, what's really sad about Hollywood as I see it is that Hollywood seems to have a very bad case of tunnel vision. And that case of tunnel vision is due to two factors. One has to do with the government and the Telecommunications Bill of 1996. Now, the Telecommunications Bill of 1996 was supposed to deregulate American media and make it more competitive. Now, before the Telecommunications Bill of 1996, a owner could only own one movie studio, one TV station, one radio station, one newspaper and magazine, or one publishing company in a local area. And this was to foster competition among businesses as related to entertainment and ensure that we got diverse viewpoints and diverse pictures of life and differing opinions of life. However, President Bill Clinton and the Republican Congress and Senate decided to deregulate American media in 1996 with the Telecommunications Bill of 1996, and this did not give us the competition that we were told we were going to get from deregulation. No, what we got was consolidation. And as media companies began buying media companies, we went from a big six media in 2002 to now a big four in 2023. And most of the media that is being produced these days is based on a singular viewpoint, and that singular viewpoint bases into my second talking point, which is all about Hollywood only being about box office. Now, because Hollywood has become consolidated as related to entertainment, everything these days is all about box office, and it's all about getting that global box office, and sadly, stories about people don't really pull the big box office that they can advertise and brag about. No, stories about people and the human condition. Sadly, these types of films don't usually, while they do well in America at the box office, internationally, a lot of these films wind up struggling. And this is why Hollywood basically is in a creative rut, as I see it, because instead of telling stories about people, what we're getting are stories that are mainly about franchises like the MCU and superhero movies, or we get movies about older franchises like Star Wars and Indiana Jones, or we get movies based on video games, or we get movies based on franchises like Fast and the Furious. We usually get movies based on commercial properties, but what's sadly has happened is we don't get a lot of movies about people anymore. And that's really sad, because movies were originally designed to make a commentary on life, and they were meant to design to give us a snapshot of life at a certain time in the world. And sadly, we don't get to see those snapshots of life anymore on film, because most of the movie studios have become consolidated, and become a corporate media oligarchy, and that corporate media oligarchy's main focus is making money not only with the American box office anymore, but with the international box office, and sadly, all of the creativity has been lost from American filmmaking. That's why I sadly have to agree with Martin Scorsese when he says that film in American cinema is dead, because American cinema basically has died at this point, because we no longer are telling stories about people. We are no longer telling stories about the human condition. We are no longer telling stories about a snapshot of a time in life. No, most films today are just made to be empty calories that are just fed to consumers, and as they are fed to consumers like junk food, they are basically meant to be devoured and then forgotten, and then people anticipate going to see the next movie in the next franchise, never thinking about what they watched the way people used to do with many classic films like Marty, which really taught us about love and romance in the human condition, movies like Sunset Boulevard, which was a powerful commentary on Hollywood, many of the films like The Godfather saga, which taught us that crime really doesn't pay, or many of the other great human films that I've watched in my time, like Ghost, which was a story about love and the end of life, or Pretty Woman, which was a brilliant satire on the fairy tale and romance, or teen movies like Clueless, which showed us how kids grew up in the 90s in ways with Amy Heckerling's brilliant film, or even Fast Times at Ridgemont High, which gave us a great snapshot of life in the 80s. I mean, these were films, again, made by brilliant filmmakers, and I could go on talking about Quentin Tarantino and his brilliant films like Kill Bill and Pulp Fiction. I mean, many of these films would not be made in modern-day Hollywood, because modern-day Hollywood, sadly, would pass on many of those great filmmakers because they don't want to make films about people. No, what they want to do is make films that just make money at the box office and forget all about the people as related to their stories. And again, that is the sad part about modern Hollywood, is that we no longer make stories about people. We no longer make commercial films about people the way they did when I was a kid in the 80s and the 90s. I mean, I remember a time when things were a bit more balanced. Yes, we got Batman 89 in 1989, but we also got other great films like When Harry Met Sally, and we got a whole bunch of other great films in 89. So there was a lot more variety as related to film back in the late 80s. I mean, in the late 80s, there was animated movies like the American Tail movies. The Little Mermaid was coming back, and there was a lot of other, comedies out there and romantic comedies. There was a little bit of something for everyone. But when I look at today's Hollywood and the movies they produce, it's almost all the same movies. Big budget superhero movies, big budget action movies, big budget franchise movies, and many of the smaller films that used to become the big franchises never even get an opportunity to grace a silver screen. And again, all of the people are basically being lost, and that is the saddest part about a modern day American film. The saddest part about modern day American film is that we no longer make movies about people anymore, and it's really just feeling like everything's coming off an assembly line, especially as related to these MCU and franchise movies. I mean, these MCU and these franchise movies basically feel like GM X bodies like the Chevrolet Citation and the Pontiac Phoenix rolling off an assembly line, and as they roll off this assembly line, they all are just coming off this line from apathetic workers, and as these apathetic workers work on this line, they basically pass by and let defects slide, and this is what leads to many of these movies becoming just, again, feeling very formulaic, feeling very boring and uninspired as related to their visuals, feeling very boring and uninspired as related to their dialogue, and feeling very two-dimensional as related to their storytelling. That's what many of these modern-day superhero movies, modern-day franchise movies That's what they basically feel like. And like the GMX bodies, yes, they're good A to B transportation, and they're good A to B entertainment for those who like those genres. But for those of us who want a little bit more depth and substance to our storytelling, these kind of films just don't cut it anymore. Because yes, Iron Man in 2008 was a very well done film with a lot of depth and layers, but what has happened over the last 15 years is that the superhero movie has become a very stale commercial product where they overcompensate for weak storytelling with bad CGI, and they also overcompensate with it with really bland storytelling. And again, the superhero movie has gotten stale, just like its other contemporaries like Star Wars and these franchise movies and many of these other movies which just focus heavily on CGI and just these franchises to get over with fans. But the whole thing is the rest of the audience feels like they have nothing to watch because there's no stories about people being produced by Hollywood. And those few films that they do produce about people, those films never get any sort of press or promotion. No, nobody really talks about many of those films, which just come and go at the box office and then head to streaming about 2 weeks later. And that is the saddest part, again, about modern entertainment. The stories about people are getting lost, and instead of us getting to know people, all we get are the same movies over and over, like again, those Chevrolet Citations and Pontiac Phoenixes, A to B entertainment that basically rots and corrodes as you try to watch them on a rewatch, because that's where you see all of the story flaws and all of the character flaws. And again, not really a great cinematic experience. And that's why I can agree, sadly, with Martin Scorsese when he says cinema is dead, because the art of cinema has been lost. I mean, great filmmakers like Martin Scorsese, Spike Lee, Quentin Tarantino, they put distinct visuals in their films. They put hard work to develop their characters to have full character transformation arcs. They go out here and really craft a story that makes you think. And sadly, we're not getting those kinds of movies anymore. No, what we usually get these days as related to commercial films are the same old product. And again, that product has basically erased people and just given us these adaptations of characters. And these adaptations of characters, again, they're very, very generic. They're very two-dimensional, and they really barely scratch the surface in terms of character development. And yes, you're watching a comic book movie, but the movie, again, feels like a comic book, and it doesn't delve any deeper into those characters, doesn't really delve deep into their psychology, doesn't really delve deep into showing us who this person is. And again, that's because you're very limited as a screenwriter when you're adapting material like a superhero character or a franchise character or one of these characters that is made from a video game. Your hands as a screenwriter get tied because everything has to stay true to the source material, to all of these details, and you really cannot go out here and get creative with your story. You really can't develop a character and really put some shades of humanity on that character. You really cannot really explore that character the way a filmmaker like a Spike Lee or a Quentin Tarantino or a Martin Scorsese or Francis Ford Coppola would. I mean, these filmmakers, they would be able to go out here and explore characters, because when you're working with original material, you can go out here and really take a character and really go out here and put some shades on them, put some layers on them, and put some depth on them, and really work at their psychology. I mean, that's one of the things I do when I'm writing stories like All About Marilyn, or when I'm doing with the recent Isis Dark Incubus book. I was able to go out here and really put some layers on some of the characters. I even did it with Temptation of John Haynes. And again, with comic book adaptations and franchise adaptations, you're tied to older stories, and again, it really hampers your writing, and that's why many of these movies just, again, they feel so hollow and empty and don't have the heart that older films that were done by brilliant filmmakers were done, like, again, Quentin Tarantino's or a Martin Scorsese or an Amy Heckerling or Spike Lee or many other filmmakers like Robert Rodriguez. Again, when you're working with original material and you're developing people on screen, you get to know someone, you get to connect with someone, you get to identify with someone. And again, that's very hard to do with modern Hollywood, because modern Hollywood is not about creating stories about people anymore. It's just about creating product. And again, this product today is very different from the product we got years ago, which at least had some substance. No, today's Hollywood product is filled with a lot of fillers, filled with a lot of artificial flavors and colors, and just, again, feels like a bland, pasteurized product just made just to make some money. And it's just become one big thing about getting to the $1 billion at the box office, and we've forgotten about the people in the story, and that makes it where the people who go to the theater really have a very hollow and shallow experience, because Hollywood movies are no longer about people. And again, that is the saddest part about Hollywood today. And again, this tunnel vision as related to superhero and franchise movies, because when I looked at the 2023 schedule, it's just sequels, reboots, remakes, and more superhero movies. And I remember thinking about 1989, and when Batman 89 came out, and the schedule was completely different. And again, the schedule had other movies on it, like I talked about, as related to the American Tail movies, The Land Before Time. You had movies like Working Girl. You had movies like When Harry Met Sally. You had a diverse selection of movies. And again, you had that diverse selection because the Hollywood at that time was competing. Studios were competing against other studios. I mean, big studios were competing against small studios at that time. And because a studio, with a small studio, all you needed was one movie to be a hit, people would go out here and make the low budget movies just as good as the big budget ones. The story would be excellent. And again, this is how we got guys like Arnold Schwarzenegger and many others to become stars, and how we wound up building future stars, which is something modern Hollywood isn't doing, because they're trying to go out here and trot out 45 and 50-year-old stars in superhero movies, trying to continue keeping these franchises going, when it's really time for them to start realizing, hey, you need to start making some stories about people, because the entire genre of superhero movies is starting to get old. I mean, we've just had the first flop with Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania. We've had other films underperform. And again, when I look at Hollywood today, again, there needs to be a focus back on people, because it's making the same mistake it did in the late 60s, continuing to think people wanted to see musicals back then and epic movies and war movies, but the audience has gotten tired. And again, what makes movies great are stories about people. And sadly, we have a Hollywood that doesn't really think about the importance of people, because people are what stories are told about. People want to listen to stories about people. People want to get in the heads of a great character, but we're impeded because everybody's caught up in these infantilized superhero movies and franchise movies of the past and the 21st century. And again, it's just, as I see it, there needs to be a bit more balance to our entertainment, because other countries like China, Japan, India, they're focusing on people, they're focusing on the human condition, and they realize that you need to tell stories about people if you want to get more people going to the theater. Because what gets more people going to the theater are hearing about stories that they can relate to, stories they can identify with, stories they can see about people who they see are like themselves or they want to be like. And we don't get to see that much anymore, because Hollywood these days makes fewer films, and they focus again with tunnel vision on box office, not understanding that what made those films classics were that these were films made with small budgets, and these films were made with small budgets and became fan favorites because they were about people. And again, as people got caught up in the commercialism as related to the merchandising and licensing, they forgot about the people, and that's why many of today's Hollywood films are a hollow experience. And again, I look at today's Hollywood, and again, we have really lost touch with people, and that's why Hollywood is struggling to find an audience for many of its movies today. Now, if you want to pick up some of my fantasy fiction on the SJS Direct imprint and my contemporary stories on the SJS Direct imprint, you can find my books in fantasy like the Isis series, the Esteem series, the John Haynes series on Amazon.com in paperback and Kindle format, and you can find my contemporary stories like the Spinsterella trilogy, the Thetas, and A Recipe for Success. You can find them also on paperback and Kindle format on Amazon.com, and my vampire novel Eternal Night. You can find all of these books on Amazon.com along with other men's issues books. And if you want to see me make more videos like this, you can send a donation to my Patreon, my PayPal, or my Cash App by clicking the links in the description box. That's all I have to say for this video. You can comment, rate, and subscribe. Now available in paperback and e-readers, John Haynes, 1987. Learn lessons about life and teenage love in the 1980s in this coming-of-age John Haynes story. Get your copy of John Haynes 1987 in paperback and e-readers at Amazon.com and online booksellers everywhere. Now available in paperback and Kindle, All About Marilyn. Learn all about the struggles of a faded former teen sitcom star in this absolutely fabulous 5-star screenplay. Get All About Marilyn in paperback and Kindle on Amazon.com today. Support Black-owned and Black-operated digital broadcast media. www.niceradionetwork.com. Nice Radio Network, broadcasting 24 hours a day, 7 days a week.